Association of the Philippines Man of the Year Award. We hasten to add that we also acknowledge the presence and active participation of and welcome our ASEAN counterparts, corporate leaders, domestic ranking bodies, global institutional investors to this conference. Thirdly, tonight is the culmination of more than 4 years of work on the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard, or the ACGS. Tonight, we award publicly for the first time ASEAN's top 50 publicly listed companies based on their ACGS scores. And fourthly, for the privilege of co-hosting these two significant events, first ever on the eve of APEC week, the Philippines has more reason to celebrate. Of course, these two events would not have been possible without the guidance and generosity of the Asian Development Bank, the cooperation of the International Finance Corporation, the assistance from the Institute of Corporate Directors and the Philippine Stock Exchange, and the financial support of our generous sponsors and all you participants. Before we commence today's many celebration with the holding of this conference, let us recall the ACMF initiative on corporate governance. With the indispensable support of the Asian Development Bank through a technical assistance for promoting an interlinked ASEAN capital market, the following objectives were adopted. 1, raising corporate governance standards and practices of ASEAN PLCs. 2, giving greater visibility to well-governed ASEAN PLCs and showcasing them as investable companies. And 3, complementing other ACMF initiatives and promoting ASEAN as an asset class. The major part of the ACMF CG initiative is the ACGS, through which the fulfillment of these objectives has been realized. The ACGS indeed raised the bar of corporate governance among the ASEAN PLCs in 6 participating countries, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Judging from the consistent increase in the average score from the first assessment results of the ACGS for 2012 to 2015, corporation in the ASEAN. Philippine companies for the next 5 years or until 2020. Let it be known that the inspiration for this is our ASEAN counterparts' own blueprint, particularly Malaysia. With this, I welcome you all to the inaugural ASEAN Corporate Governance Conference, as well as to the awards night later. Let this be the beginning of a tradition of excellence in corporate governance for the ASEAN. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair Teresita Herbosa, for your kind welcome remarks. And now, to give us the opening remarks, is the Executive Chairman of the Securities Commission, or SC Malaysia, Vice Chairman of the International Organization of Securities Commission, or IOSCO, and Chairman of the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, ACMF. Please join me in welcoming Datuk Ranjit Ajit Singh.
Thank you. The Honorable Armando Tatanco Jr., Governor of the Central Bank of the Philippines, the Honorable Teresita Herbosa, Chairperson of the Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines, Ms. Noriko Ogawa, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. I'm delighted to be here at this inaugural Corporate Governance Conference that we have here in the Philippines, as well as, of course, the very important awards ceremony that we're all looking forward to later this evening. The event, I think, as has been said in the remarks earlier, certainly marks a very, very important milestone in the work of the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, and which is the forum of the region's 10 capital market regulators. And certainly this has been an agenda that has been well emphasized by the forum as a core policy agenda for us for many years. And so on behalf of my ACMF colleagues, I'd like to express my deepest appreciation to the Philippines SEC for the effort in culminating all the work that's been done through these events that we're having this morning as well as this evening, and of course for the hosting of this particular event. I'd also like to extend my appreciation to the Asian Development Bank, the IFC, the Philippine Stock Exchange, and the Institute of Corporate Directors for their support. I must say that my associations with the Philippines SEC and both for many years now, both at the regional as well as the global level, has demonstrated that they have really made a very strong commitment towards capital market development. And I know Chair Herbosa has been an active member at the regional ACMF and the IOSCO Growth and Emerging Markets Committee level, and has pursued and has been very keen to look towards development initiatives for the Philippines capital markets, and I commend her for those efforts. I'm also extremely delighted and honored to have on this occasion our keynote speaker, Governor Tatanco. Thank you very much, Governor, for making time on this special occasion to be here. The Governor and I meet at the Financial Stability Board meetings, and where he formerly co-chaired the Regional Consultative Group for Asia. And I must say, in the course of our discussions and his comments at the Financial Stability Board, I have been thoroughly impressed by his views on emerging and developing capital market issues, and so I'm not at all surprised where he continues to be ranked this highly as a global central banker of the level that he gets recognized for. Congratulations on all that, Governor. Ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed a happy coincidence for this event to be inaugurated in Manila in the same year that Malaysia is chairing the ASEAN initiative on a wider scale, and an year that we are targeting within ASEAN to establish the ASEAN Economic Community. And certainly from my time here, and it's quite clear that you see the energy and dynamism that the city has, which not only, in my view, represents the growth momentum of the Philippines, which has been undoubtedly impressive, but certainly the potential that the region offers itself. And therefore, looking ahead, you see this narrative of growth and optimism playing out, not only in Manila, but also from Kuala Lumpur to Jakarta, Hanoi, Bangkok, and beyond. And it is this particular narrative that we as policymakers want to see through to ensure that the ASEAN's record of steady economic expansion is sustained and meaningfully translated into prosperity as well as greater opportunities for fellow 600 million ASEAN citizens. However, for such a promise to become reality, a wide range of cross-cutting reforms must be pursued for ASEAN to be able to pool their strengths in delivering growth across the whole region. It goes without saying that these reforms are going to be complex and manifold, given the wide diversity that the members have. But it is important if we recognize the criticality of financial and capital markets as a major infrastructure for economies, that we must continue our commitment towards these reforms. And therefore, certainly from the perspective of the ASEAN Capital Market Forum, we view and we are convinced that for the capital markets to be able to efficiently serve the region as well as domestic needs, it is essential for there to be greater interconnectivity within the region's capital markets through efforts such as removal of barriers through intra-regional flows of capital, services and talent, while working time and effort over the years to design a wide range of initiatives for intra-regional investment flows and cross-border participation. For example, we've introduced the ASEAN Common Disclosure Standards. We've introduced an expedited review process for secondary listings. We've worked with the stock exchanges to have in place an ASEAN trading link mechanism. And more recently, we've introduced collective investment that have been approved for distribution within the member countries. Now, we are conscious, of course, that in the implementation of these initiatives, typically they are taken on a staggered approach, reflecting the readiness of the member countries. But what is important to realize is that in all these initiatives, all the member countries have come together to put the frameworks in place. So therefore, they have a commitment towards the framework, and it's a case really of opting in as and when they're ready. The ACMF also recognizes that there are very important market development initiatives that need to be pursued, and therefore recently harness the skills both within the public and private sector to help in terms of domestic capital market development moving forward in the area of both market infrastructure as well as in capacity building. In essence, ladies and gentlemen, the objective really is about creating an environment where ASEAN businesses have greater opportunities to be able to use ASEAN capital for financing. ASEAN households can benefit from the growth of these businesses, be it as investors or consumers, and at the same time, such interconnectivity also provides the ASEAN asset class with greater scale and visibility at the international level, thus making it a more attractive business and investment destination. Nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, our firm optimism in ASEAN's long-term potential does not mean that we are unaware of the current challenges that are affecting not only markets within the region, but also emerging markets globally. It is clear that where efforts have been made by policymakers to strengthen their capital markets, such as strengthening institutional structures, the development of deeper local currency bond markets, introduction of stronger regulatory frameworks, it has undoubtedly strengthened the resilience of the economies and financial markets. And while regulatory and institutional reforms such as this continue to be critical, we must recognize that a very important source of resilience, both at the macro and firm level, is none other than corporate governance. With the private sector playing an increasingly dominant role in driving ASEAN growth, it is clear that the health and longevity of our corporations are becoming significantly more intertwined with the fate of our economies through their impact not only on national income, but also employment and government revenue, which is vital in the delivery of essential public services, thus making corporate governance a public interest imperative. While this fact has been long recognized by the regulators, capital market regulators in the region, particularly since the Asian financial crisis about 15 years ago, it has recently gained newfound traction at the global level, including at the Financial Stability Board, IOSCO, and we see now the new principles coming out from the OECD. And all this have been acutely made aware since the global financial of 2008, which has illustrated that even the most sophisticated markets were not impervious to systemic weaknesses in corporate governance. And therefore, global regulators are increasingly emphasizing the role that high standards of corporate governance play in building trust and confidence, which is imperative in resilient and robust capital markets. At the ASEAN level, I'm pleased to see that the private sector has been very receptive to the efforts that the ACMF has made to strengthen corporate governance practices in the region, and I must commend all of you for this effort. The ASEAN Corporate Governance Initiative is indeed one of the success stories of the ASEAN Capital Market Implementation Plan, with one of the highest rates of participation among all the measures that have been introduced over the last few years. And the events of the day are a testament to the progress being made by leading ASEAN public listed companies on this front. If I may finish off by making a slight mention of Malaysia. In Malaysia, corporate governance has remained a core policy priority for the Securities Commission, who has led efforts in this area together with our market participants for the past 15 years. As one of the earliest in the region to introduce a dedicated code on corporate governance, our early efforts focused on designing rules that clearly elucidate regulatory expectations for good corporate governance as well as corporate conduct. Over time, such expectations were increasingly internalized by companies and market participants. Our efforts then moved towards empowering the rest of the capital market ecosystem to play a more active role in incentivizing firms to adopt a culture of good governance, which was articulated in our corporate governance blueprint a few years ago. A number of important initiatives and outcomes have arisen from the blueprint, including last year the introduction of a stewardship code for institutional investors, the establishment of an institutional investor council, as well as changes to voting procedures during shareholders' meetings to allow for more equitable exercise of control and representation. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, let me say it is clear that ASEAN has made tremendous progress in our efforts to further strengthen corporate governance within the region, which was in no small part due to not only the perseverance of the region's policymakers, but also the commitment and support of the private sector and civil society. And such collaboration, as Chair Harboza has made comments about, underscore how corporate governance is really our collective responsibility. As we move forward together as the ASEAN Economic Community, it is essential for all of us to continue to press on with our reform agenda, an agenda that is likely to become more challenging as we seek to embed the notions of good governance and responsible conduct, not only within the regulatory architecture of the capital market, but also its very culture and DNA, an undertaking which demands a mastery of the intersection between rules and incentives, as well as ethics and morality. Once again, thank you very much for being here today, and I look forward to a productive conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Datuk Ranjit Ajit Singh. And now, we are honored to have with us as our keynote speaker, the Governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. He also serves as Chairman of the Monetary Board, the Anti-Money Laundering Council, Governor Amando M. Tetanco Jr.
Thank you, Ricky. ACMF and Securities Commission Malaysia Chairman Dr. Ranjit Singh, Philippine SEC Chair Teresita Herbosa, and Thailand SEC Secretary General Rapi Sucharitnahol, distinguished officials and members of the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, ADB Executive Director Gaudencio Hernandez, Deputy Director General Noriko Ogawa, other officials of the Asian Development Bank, fellow advocates of good governance in the private and public sector groups of the ASEAN, my colleagues in the Financial Sector Forum and from other government agencies, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, and to our foreign guests, a warm welcome to Manila. It is indeed heartwarming to see a room full of like-minded individuals coming together to celebrate and to share milestones in our journey towards governance transformation in the ASEAN. I thank the Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission for the privilege of addressing this first conference on corporate governance organized by ASEAN regulators. I think it's a challenge because addressing this crowd is like preaching to the choir. But anyway, in preparing for my remarks this morning, a few questions came to my mind. First, can self-interest lead to greater good? Prior to Adam Smith, it was counterintuitive to say yes. Human nature, in its narrowest sense, if you must, is anathema to the proposition that individuals naturally uphold the common good. But proceeding from Smith's theory, we tap individuals' natural inclination to pursue their own interests. We motivate them to see that good governance works to their benefit. Self-interest, therefore, is channeled to nationally desirable ends. Another irony results. Supervised entities are now competing to adopt good governance principles, and in so doing, there is cooperation with regulated entities, competition toward cooperation. This provokes another thought. Can the regulator partner with the regulated? I believe so. When standards are merely imposed from the top down, results can be unsustainable. To have sustainability, interests of the regulator and the regulated must converge. Can more granular measurement lead to unlimited possibilities? In the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, I believe the answer is yes. Since its initiation 4 years ago, under the ACMF implementation plan, the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard has raised awareness for tangible benefits of good governance practices among publicly listed companies. The scorecard has become increasingly more than a compliance metric or tick box. Rather, it is now a tool to achieve organizational alignment and focus. OECD studies show that investors have greater confidence in firms whose governance standards are measured and clearly understood, consequently allowing better access to equity and debt finance, leading to reduced cost of capital, and thus translating to improved share value. These are goals both regulators and the regulated desire. Since the initiative began in 2011, regulators have championed good governance principles. It is for your own good, as we say, and we have not been off the mark in this pronouncement. Our advocacy has been heard. McKinsey has found that boards of directors of corporations are increasingly more confident in their knowledge of the companies they serve and more strategic in their approach. And we know that strategy formulation is the first step to good governance. Also, as shown in an ADB study, PLCs have begun to voluntarily adopt best practices. There is greater appreciation that a balanced scorecard can generate firm-level governance improvements and attract foreign investments. Ultimately, this enhance the region's visibility, integrity, and branding as an asset class. The impact of good governance is not just on the micro, it is also on the macro. There is evidence that improvements in corporate governance of firms positively affect aggregate economic activities at the country, and in our case, regional levels. The studies show this especially so when firms improve transparency. When firms are better governed, interests of the firm and of stakeholders are more closely aligned. This gives firms stronger incentives to achieve high productivity and efficiency, thereby raising economy-wide productivity growth. Success inspires more success, and good governance results in the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. In terms of corporate governance, ASEAN has certainly come a long way since the 1997 financial crisis. OECD reports that many key financial and corporate institutional reforms here have translated to stronger regulation, better resourced regulators, new institutions, and an increasingly involved shareholder base. A key facet of this positive development is corporate governance reform. Moreover, as the ACMF effort has reached its fourth year, we have a better understanding of corporate governance standards across the region. As regulators, we now have a common diagnostic tool to help us improve corporate governance standards. Each country in the region is expected to build on these standards to create their own corporate governance framework. We should clearly articulate expectations on, among others, the fitness and propriety of the board, checks and balances, and transparency. The fundamental principle is that the tone of good governance should be set and come from the top. It should remain the highest priority as it emphasizes the importance of having fit and proper standards for individual board members. These standards, we believe, should put as much weight on integrity as on knowledge, expertise, and competence. Fitness and propriety are also displayed in the exercise of independent and objective judgment. The state of independence is defined by parameters on term limits, a cap on the number of concurrent independent directorships, and the challenge of a seemingly limited number of qualified independent directors. Systems of checks and balances should likewise be deeply embedded across all levels in the company. Unquestionably, an environment that fosters transparency should be the new norm. A system for cooperation and collaboration among government bodies, regulators, and supervisors should be in place to ensure reasonableness of disclosure requirements. We must display the will and capacity to implement standards and take enforcement actions if needed. A business model that often draws discussion and one that is almost always associated with our region is related party interest. While we recognize that such a corporate structure has inherent risks, we must also be mindful that synergies can lead to success of individual companies. It would therefore be beneficial to set higher oversight and control standards. This to address conflict of interest concerns and propriety of related transactions. Our own efforts at the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas with respect to our supervised entities follow the global trust closely. while at the same time being mindful of emerging domestic industry concerns and unique situations in our legal and regulatory environments. However, regulation alone is not enough. A culture that induces appropriate and proper behavior, even when nobody is watching, is needed. Ladies and gentlemen, the scope of governance must be broad. Our initiatives must not begin and end with PLCs only. The financial environment where PLCs operate is made up of many moving parts. Efforts must extend to financial market segments as well. In particular, we must promote orderly financial markets that feature real price discovery and enforce responsible market conduct. From the perspective of a central bank, we view corporate governance as the foundation of safe and sound banking operations. It embodies principles of fairness, accountability, and transparency. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision emphasizes that since banks have an important financial intermediation role in the economy, the public and the market must be highly sensitive to any difficulties potentially arising from any corporate governance shortcomings in banks. Clearly, the financial industry thrives on public trust to sustain resiliency. But I believe that these principles are true not just for the banking sector, but for all commercial endeavors as well. We should also recognize that SMEs make significant contributions to regional growth. Thus, they should be included in our continuing transformation process. This transformation should also not leave consumer protection behind. Ladies and gentlemen, governance must be inclusive. For certain, we give credit to ACMF for identifying good corporate governance as a prerequisite for economic and financial integration. In doing so, ACMF strategically built a strong foundation for our single market of 10 separate economies. Good corporate governance as a bedrock is essential for an economy whose combined GDP is expected to grow at least 4 times to $10 trillion by 2030, and is projected to become the 4th largest in the world by 2050. With this forecast, we are therefore beginning strong with that trajectory in mind. Diversity in ASEAN is a good thing. It suggests availability of niche markets that can be tapped. Different needs can be explored and met. Pockets of expertise can be harnessed. Each nation has a comparative advantage that will benefit the others. Regardless of our differences, we should work together to continually make the scorecard reflect internationally recognized good practices in a manner that remains relevant and applicable to ASEAN. This can be done through systematic collaboration to ensure cohesion and promote synergy. As each nation is here represented, I'm confident that we are off to an auspicious and productive start. But can there be constancy amidst change? The answer, I would say, is yes. This year, as mentioned earlier, the Philippine SEC celebrates its 79th founding anniversary. Its core functions endure, yet it also makes history by launching the Philippine Corporate Governance Blueprint. And in crafting the plan, I understand that the SEC convened a multi-sectoral consultative working group which considered past, present, and changing requirements of corporate governance, while remaining sensitive to nuances of the domestic market. For this endeavor, we congratulate the Philippine SEC and its proactive and tireless chairperson, my friend and colleague, Honorable Teresa Herbosa, who's been with us in the Financial Sector Forum, in the Anti-Money Laundering Council, and the Financial Stability Coordinating Council. We look forward to the blueprint's introduction. My final thoughts for this morning: for sustainability of corporate governance initiative, achieving synergy among seeming ironies is the challenge. Self-interest toward the greater good, competition toward cooperation, partnerships between regulators and the regulated, consistency amidst change, unity in diversity. In addressing the seeming ironies, balance is key. Balance in choosing a firm regulatory stance while respecting and giving a wide berth to what motivates PLCs and individual firms. And I believe you're on the right track. As we fulfill our mandate as the country's central monetary authority, as a member of the Philippine Financial Sector Forum, comprised of financial regulators in the country, we stand one with you in the vision to make ASEAN an asset class of its own. So on behalf of the Monetary Board and the officers and staff of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas and the Financial Sector Forum, I congratulate the ACMF and the 50 PLCs of the region, inaugural award recipients of the ASEAN Corporate Governance Award, for being exemplar in your way of governance and being the elite first of many batches that will bring in more investments and growth into our region. We warmly applaud you. As we say in the vernacular, maraming salamat at mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Thank you, Governor Tetanco. I'm not sure if many of you know, but just despite running the monetary system of the Philippines and also overseeing arrangements for the APEC, Governor Tetanco still deigned to come and join us this morning on his birthday. So can we please give a round of applause? Thank you very much, Governor Tetanco, Datuk Ranjit Anjit Singh, and Teresita Herbosa. Chair Tess, I think they need a commemorative photo. Thank you very much. Thank you. We can sing at lunchtime, sir.
Thanks, Vic.
Thank you, sir. Again, thank you, Chair Herbosa, Datuk Rajit. All right. Now, here to discuss the importance of corporate governance from the investor's point of view is BlackRock's Head for Asia Pacific for Corporate Governance and Responsible Investment for the Asia Pacific region. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Prue Bennett.
Thank you, Ricky. Governor Armando Tetanco Jr. from the Bangko Sentral Filipinas, Datuk Ranjit Anjit Singh, Chairman of ASEAN Capital Markets Forum and Chair of the Malaysian Securities Commission, Teresita Herbosa, Chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines, Kun Rape Sucharita Akul, Secretary General of the Securities Exchange of Thailand, and Nariko Ogawa, Deputy Director of the ADB Bank, other distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak to you. Today I would like to provide you with a view from the perspective of a global asset manager of corporate governance. Anyone in the investment community with doubts about the impact of corporate governance and corporate culture needs only to look at what has recently happened with Volkswagen and the destruction of shareholder value, and to realise what is at stake for even the biggest businesses in the world when there is a major failure of corporate governance. Closer to home, we read about the accounting fraud that perpetuated for many years at Toshiba, again resulting in destruction of shareholder value. In ASEAN, for those companies where there's a perception that they have been linked to the fires in Indonesia, the market reaction has been swift, and many have had their products pulled from supermarket shelves. These events might have seemed unimportant to the way businesses here were run in the Philippines and also in the region only a few years ago. But these days, corporate governance and corporate values are firmly on the agenda of investors. I want to talk to you today about this shift, why corporate governance matters even more than ever, and what I do in my role with a large asset manager. And I particularly want to give you a sense, built on my 20 years of experience in this area, of the way you can manage risk and make your businesses take a more strategic approach to corporate governance and benefit from the bottom line and long-term shareholder value of your companies by understanding and matching the expectations of investors. Corporate governance isn't a new concept, and it has been a topic of discussion in this region for more than 15 years. Over that period in this region, we have seen the development of codes of corporate governance, including the recently released OECD guidelines, corporate governance stewardship codes, and also the development of the ASEAN Scorecard. But what does this all mean to a large asset manager such as BlackRock, and what matters of corporate governance do we consider important? So I might start again with telling you a little bit about BlackRock and what we do. So BlackRock is a large US-based fund manager with over $4.7 trillion under management. And I have to say, every day I go to work, I still can't get my head around the significance of that figure. But a significant portion of those funds under management, around 2/3, is what is called passive investment. These are investments that are linked to various indices such as index funds or exchange-traded funds such as the iShares product. And with passive investment, selling is not an option, which means that we are a long-term shareholder in this region. So the portfolio for a passive investment is structured according to the specific index, and that may be set up by MSCI or another index provider. So we do find ourselves holding companies that have poor corporate governance practices, and selling is not an option. Other equity investment styles that we have include scientific active equity, which is a quant-based process driven by an algorithm from many data points, including data points around corporate governance. And lastly, active equity, where we have a portfolio manager and a team that actually makes a conscious decision to buy, hold or sell particular stocks. And corporate governance is very much an issue that's taken into account in that decision-making process. Well, BlackRock has over 12,000 employees. I actually sit within a group of 22 called the Corporate Governance and Responsible Investment Team, and I head up the Asia-Pacific region. One of our main roles is proxy voting, and we try to vote at all the meetings of the companies that we have shares in, and this is overlaid with a process of corporate engagement on environmental, social and governance issues. When I look at the companies we invest in, there are corporate governance principles that guide our processes and activities. But for today's presentation, I would like to highlight a couple of the most important ones. And all of these principles are disclosed publicly on our website. As a large investor, we are able and feel a responsibility to monitor the companies in which we invest and to engage with them constructively and privately where we believe that may help protect shareholder value. We don't try to micromanage companies. We present our views as a long-term shareholder and listen to companies' responses. We see environmental and social issues as corporate governance issues integral to successful company management. Our corporate governance program is an investment function because it is focused on long-term economic value associated with company leadership and management. We work closely with the fundamental portfolio managers, and the reason we do that is that they have in-depth knowledge of these companies, and we use that knowledge when we're making our voting decisions and also develop our engagement strategies. The team acts as a clearinghouse across BlackRock's investment teams with the intention to present a consistent message to companies about corporate governance. It is often not well understood that voting is in the best long-term interest of shareholders is one of our most important roles and the most common form of engagement that we have with companies. When concerns are identified during the process, we will enter into private dialogue with company management and board members. As a long-term shareholder, we are keen to build constructive relationships with companies and we believe this is more likely to occur if we allow them time to address the issues that we have identified and support them through that process. Other reasons we may engage with a company may be because there has been a significant event, such as an environmental issue which may have impacted operations, and we will engage to ensure that the company has recognised or done a root cause analysis about what has caused that, to ensure that the policies and practices have been put into place to ensure that that doesn't happen again. Another reason why we may engage with a company is around a corporate governance issue which we may not be able to express our views through proxy voting. An example of that would be succession planning, where we may be voting for the directors as we vote at the annual general meeting, but there's a lack of clarity around the succession plan of perhaps the CEO or the chairman's role, and so we will engage to get a better understanding of that. We also have what we call our risk identifier model, and we run all our portfolios through this model to try and identify corporate governance risks, and where our model identifies risks that could lead to an engagement. And I do want to emphasise that the way we prepare our models, we do rely on third-party data, and they are looking at publicly available information that's been published in various annual reports. So where that information is not available, the service providers generally provide a low score or show that that risk is not being managed. So that's why disclosure is very important to us as an investor. So what do we want to see from our investee companies? In the ASEAN region, BlackRock has invested in around 600 companies totaling just over $29 billion US. One of the key challenges in this region is the presence of block shareholders, that's both state and family. And the corporate governance structure commonly seen in jurisdictions such as the US and the UK call for board structures to have a majority of independent directors. However, most of these companies are widely held and do not have the block shareholder situation. So if we focus on family-controlled companies, and a lot of the companies that we are invested in here are family-controlled, these have been growing over the last 2 to 3 generations and have been, in most cases, very successful. Often, the founder has created a unique culture which has contributed to the success of the family business, and we often see several family members involved at both executive and non-executive levels. When these companies list, it is a chance for the family to realise some of the value that they have created. Corporate governance standards in this region generally require a third of the board to be independent. And often when we're reviewing the composition of the board in terms of independence, we are sceptical of the classification of some of these directors as independent, as they often have other relationships with the founding family. But there's no doubt that there can be a strong alignment of interests between the family and long-term investors, given that the family has a significant amount of its wealth tied up in the listed entity. The family too is a long-term investor, as it cannot sell quickly, just like we are with our passive investors, we can't sell. So we do see a strong sense of alignment. But what we often find with these companies is a lack of transparency around the operations of the board and the selection process for independent directors. And when I refer to independent directors on the board of a family-controlled company, I'm not referring to just bringing in an outsider who may be destructive to the operations of the board. First of all, independent directors need to be competent and also bring an appropriate skill level to the board and engage in a constructive way with family members by bringing independent perspectives and a constructive advice and counsel. Effective corporate governance of family-controlled companies is more complex and challenging than ever. Companies need boards to help them meet the regulatory compliance basics, but the most effective boards are those that easily check that box while also delivering solid strategic counsel and direction. Recruiting and developing both family and independent directors who go well beyond basic needs is the secret to building a high-performing, fully actualised board. Based on my experience in this region, I classify family companies into 3 broad categories. The first category comprises companies that have no respect for minority shareholders. Such companies tend to keep profitable businesses outside of the listed entity, are involved in abusive related party transactions, and provide little transparency into how the company operates. Then there is the group, which is the majority of companies in the region, which looks at corporate governance as a compliance issue. These companies tick all the boxes regarding local corporate governance standards, but focus on corporate governance as a compliance issue and effectively a cost to the company. From an investor perspective, we still do not get an understanding of how the company operates, and it is difficult to get a full understanding of the risks, particularly environmental and social risks, faced by the company and how such risks are managed. The third category, which is probably represents the smallest number of companies, but an increasing number, are those companies that embrace corporate governance as a strategic issue. These companies value the constructive input of an independent director can make to the decision-making process of the board. Disclosure is comprehensive, particularly in relation to the company's exposure to and management of environmental and social issues. Disclosure is more transparent, and they don't see corporate and social responsibilities as a philanthropic exercise, but as strategic to the company. These companies will stand out to global investors, and where demand on the stock is increased, the impact of the cost of equity can be significant. And just in Hong Kong recently, where I'm based, there was an announcement between two family-controlled companies, Hong Kong Holdings and Hutchison. And what that did was to provide, it was an announcement to do with a merger, and what it did was to provide shareholders with a better understanding of the succession plans of the two listed entities. At the time of the announcement, there was a significant increase in the share price of both entities, so a significant increase in value for investors purely based on this announcement about clarity around corporate governance issues. There was no changes in revenue levels. There were no changes in market share. There was no cost-cutting involved. It was purely giving shareholders an insight into how the succession planning was going to take place for those two entities that released value. And companies need to understand that corporate governance is not a cost. We actually see it as an investment. And there is research to back this up. Good corporate governance should be a business case of boards and should not be seen as a compliance and cost issue. According to Deutsche Bank in 2012, firms with high ratings of corporate social responsibility and environmental and social and governance factors have a lower cost of capital, and this firmly puts the issue of sustainability into the office of the Chief Financial Officer. To quote a paper published by Oxford University and Arabesque Partners in 2014, solid environmental, social and governance practices result in better operational performance of firms. Stock price performance of companies is positively influenced by good sustainability practices. And lastly, in a 2011 paper published by Eccles, Lanu and Serafin, high sustainability firms dramatically outperformed the low sustainability ones in terms of both stock market and accounting measures. Generally, such studies do not show causality, but rather show correlation between environmental, social and governance issues and long-term value creation. Corporate governance is a human issue. It is about culture at the top. This has to be generated from the leadership of the firm. Regulation has a role to play as well. Good corporate governance codes with a compliance on a comply or explain basis is essential. And such codes, we believe, should be reviewed at least every 3 years, and consultation processes really must involve key institutional investors. BlackRock has recently participated in the consultation process for the new corporate governance code that has been released in Japan. We're also seeing an increase in the number of countries introducing stewardship codes. The UK has had a stewardship code since 2010, and this has been effective by encouraging engagement between institutional investors and their investee companies. Japan and Malaysia have also recently introduced stewardship codes. We see advantages in having local stewardship codes, and that is that it encourages local investors to increase their dialogue with investee companies. Global asset managers such as BlackRock already have the processes in place to meet the requirements of such codes, It is generally the local asset managers and asset owners that need to develop these processes and in some ways can have more influence over the corporate governance standards of the companies that they invest in locally. As with the introduction of corporate governance codes, the participation of global asset managers in any consultation processes should be encouraged. Other features that we see strengthening markets are the establishment of independent anti-corruption agencies, independent audit oversight bodies, together with effective enforcement. An effective regulatory environment gives global asset managers the comfort to invest in the particular jurisdiction. Country risk is very much an issue that our portfolio managers take into account when into their valuation models. So I'd just like to finish with some key points on the corporate perspective and also on the regulatory perspective. Boards increasingly need to see corporate governance as a strategic issue which drives better decision making. Strong corporate culture needs to be effectively communicated to shareholders. And from asset managers, there's a growing demand for greater transparency around corporate governance practices and exposure to and management of environmental issues. And these very much influence the way that we look at companies and the way we invest, the way we vote, and the way we engage. From a regulatory perspective, we would like to see appropriate funding of regulators, independent audit oversight bodies, independent anti-corruption agencies, and effective enforcements. I think initiatives such as the Securities Commission of the Philippines with the blueprint are excellent, and we'd like to see more of that, and that just gives us a better understanding of the road path for corporate governance in this country. Governance transformation in this region will be a journey, and it will be a journey for investors, issuers and regulators. And this will work well if the three groups have, as Mariko Ogawa said, shared vision with respect to corporate governance transformation. The outcome, if we all work together in this transformation process, I think will be immeasurable. Once again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be able to present BlackRock's views today, and I wish you well for the rest of this really terrific conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prue, for that insightful speech. And so I know many of you have questions you'd like to ask Prue as well as the other speakers. So let's take a short break and resume in 10 minutes. So I have on my watch 10:15. So maybe let's get back here at 10:25. Thank you very much.
How do we integrate this to the strategic issues of the companies rather than just being the compliance? And with the fact that 70% of our listed companies are still very much family owned, how do we put them into place the awareness that this corporate governance is very, very important? It's not for meeting regulatory requirement as such, but it's something that would provide for sustainability of their own companies. So our strategy for the next 5 years would be really to target the owners of the companies, the shareholders of the companies, and then trying to use various strategies to get a buy-in from them. I think that's the way we see it in Thailand at the moment. Thank you.
Very much. Can I just draw out some of the common themes that came out of this discussion so far? And one is about the strategic approach to corporate governance and the regulatory approach. And so it comes down to what sort of regulatory approach should ASEAN countries adopt? And particularly, could we have your thoughts on, and I think Sajito mentioned, comply versus explain corporate governance to corporates. Can we have your views on which regulatory approach would be more suitable to ASEAN? Is it a forced compliance, or do you try to promote a voluntary compliance to corporate governance? Let's start with Sajito.
Okay. It's a good question. Whether voluntary or forced compliance. Of course, I think it's like in Thailand or probably Philippines, most of the Indonesian company owned by a family, which is mostly they directly or indirectly owned more than 50% of ownership, which is basically they control the management, they control everything. And when we introduced rules and regulation, which is a bit strict, like as I told you before, the comply or explain, it seems to them that it's comply or explain. But from our perspective, if they never explain or they never comply or they don't explain quite, clearly on their annual report, so what the regulator must do. So we need to enforce. So we cannot let them just write everything they want. So in my perspective, because my career or my life is in enforcement as for formal and criminal investigator. So to make compliance is the only way is that we have to force them. So enforcement, forcible rule must be available. That's why in our jurisdiction, some of the corporate government principle has been issued into rules, which is when they violate the rules, they have to pay. They have to follow all the sanctions available in the capital market law, from the lowest, enforcement like written admonition until, some of the more severe sanction. So in my perspective, from the beginning, like when we issue rule, comply or explain, probably we let them a couple of years to adjust voluntarily. But then until a certain times, we have to enforce, because it's the only way they have to comply is by the enforceable rule and enforcement, tough enforcement. Thank you.
Share your views on the comply versus explain approach.
Sure. One point to note is that certain risk limitations to taking a very prescriptive approach. If we take a very overly prescriptive approach, the constituents will tend to follow very strictly whatever you prescribe, but they will tend not to do more than what is required. So there could be an outcome that may be unintended if our objective is to try to foster a greater sense of responsibility, a certain culture which takes into account the views of long-term investors. And so from that point of view, I think there's a balance that we need to strike between articulating the principles that we aspire towards and having in place something that at least fosters a certain minimum level of standards. And I think that's where the comply explain sort of comes in, because there are certain things we want them to disclose as a minimum, and if they are not able to disclose, at least to articulate. And so there will be also discussions as to how substantive your explanation is. Is it good enough or not? And that's where it becomes a little bit more subjective, where we can sit together and we can disagree about why you feel that you shouldn't comply or you cannot comply. So that's the part that becomes a little bit more difficult to sort of enforce. And the other point that I also want to highlight is we must not forget the role of the broader market. The regulators have a role to play in public enforcement, and where certain minimum standards are prescribed, we have to enforce, just as he mentioned. And so there are, in Singapore's context, for example, the SGX rules were recently amended, which allow them to actually now even fine the companies for breaches of listing rules. And that would extend to sort of this kind of disclosures where companies fail to explain. So it could happen. But beyond that, I think the other stakeholders, such as the investors, as well as the other professional bodies, professional firms that can actually offer certain research views and so on. So those parties play an equally important role in the overall market discipline, because a lot of these scandals will not be detected by regulators. And most of the time, the red flags are actually sort of raised by professionals on the ground or other stakeholders on the ground. And so we must also take into account that they play an equally important role. And so therefore, there's a form of private enforcement, if I may say, that actually comes together. And so if these two can work together, then I think the regulatory response can then be sort of in a way calibrated. But certainly if there are certain minimum standards that actually sort of get raised, because over time companies are all expected to do certain things, actually we can start to sort of codify more of these. But that is a journey in itself.
Kunrapi.
Right. I think the regulation is very, very good to enforce a minimum standard, but it can never get to the level of best practice. I think I think when we talk about the issue of corporate governance, we are talking about best practice. And best practice can only come in from the buy-in of the people who has to practice it. I think that's, we mustn't lose sight of that. So I think a lot of the issues that we talk about, that regulations there is there to serve as a minimum standards. Market force is also very important because it's something that really forces people and the owners to pay attention to these issues. And the other thing that I think it's equally important and must never be overlooked is the peer pressure themselves of the people who have to comply. I mean, I've worked in the private sectors before, and I've worked with a couple of big institutions as independent directors. And it's a fact that they always watch the other companies as to what they're doing. And if these other companies got a better ranking, got a better rating, then the pressure really goes down to their own team to try to fight for this positioning. So I think it's an overall issue that I think we have to use a combination of tools. Regulation is one, but it's the most basic, and it's a very blunt tools in order to use that. Market force is again something that we need to really go out and try to win win a support and momentum. Peer pressure is actually down to themselves. And the other tools that I think that we saw has been quite successful in the Thai capital market would be to really how to engage the industry and to get a buy-in. For example, with the new corporate governance code and everything that we are trying to launch, one of the most insightful feedback that we got from the industry was that how many directors, independent or even the management directors, actually go out and read corporate governance guidelines as their bedside books. It's none. So they suggest that rather than going out with a lot of these written materials and guidelines and regulations, why don't you use things like a discussion forum, focus group, and then an open forum whereby people can sit down and then discuss about these issues and what are the pitfalls and what are the ways ahead. And they say that that's probably the most effective ways of trying to get people to have a buy-in.
Very much, Kunrapi, and I think this is I think we've got a number of interesting insights on regulatory compliance, and from what I take it, so the takeaways here is maybe some minimum standards where regulatory enforcement and compliance is important, but beyond that, it's looking at other ways to promote best practices. Kunrapi mentioned peer pressure. So if I now turn to the Corporate Governance Scorecard, which was introduced in 2012 by the ASEAN Capital Market Forum, has this been a useful peer pressure or tool for promoting corporate governance within your own country among your publicly listed companies, but also within ASEAN. So I'd like to get your perspectives on that. How effective has the ASEAN Scorecard been as a peer pressure tool to promote corporate governance beyond mandatory compliance? Maybe we'll start with Kun Rapi, who first mentioned peer pressure.
Well, you probably see tonight as how many people from Thailand attending. That would be a very good indication of how peer pressure is at work in real life, and it has been a big thing, not just on the ASEAN Scorecard, but because we adopt this corporate governance rating domestically since 2002, when the IOD has really been releasing, and the SET, the Stock Exchange of Thailand, has an annual award forum whereby they give out awards, and then we have the board of the years and things like that, and it's a big event. People really gear up for it, and a lot of the big corporates in Thailand have actually made a substantial investment in the corporate affairs side just to look at these particular issues, and I think it's the ASEAN Scorecard is really the icing on the cake. It's actually giving another impetus on what we have already done domestically. So yes, for me, as a person who's worked in the private sectors before, I think this sort of award, this sort of recognition, it creates huge awareness and really a healthy competitions among the participants.
Have your thoughts on the scorecard as a tool?
I think the ASEAN Scorecard, the CG Scorecard is definitely a useful tool because it provides a common language across the different ASEAN countries for publicly listed companies to be evaluated for corporate governance practices. So it's actually a very good first step towards, I would say, more meaningful, embracing of good corporate culture, good corporate practices, which I feel would have to extend beyond just looking at what are the criteria that the different regulators have set, and do I meet these criteria, and therefore I qualify or don't qualify. So we should sort of in a way encourage that. So within Singapore, apart from the ACGS, actually there are also other tools that sort of come into place to actually assess whether the companies are sort of in a way fulfilling these objectives. So within Singapore itself, we have the Governance and Transparency Index. We also look at reports that are issued by professional bodies and research firms that actually undertake corporate governance studies across the different markets. And I think that to us also helps to sort of bring out some of the qualitative issues beyond just whether I meet or not, but really, are they actually practicing certain things? Are there good practices that we should even consider sort of advocating and encouraging the industry participants to actually sort of come together to put in place?
Sachito.
Well, ASEAN CG Scorecard really impact on our market. And tonight especially, we're going to have two of our companies and others, And as the largest Asian countries in ASEAN, of course, it's a big challenge. And hopefully by OJK, the Indonesian FA, issuing all the corporate government rules and regulation, next year, probably, we're not going to be only two. As the largest country, we're going to dominate, probably. We have to be optimistic on that. And, yeah. Because even when I was a student overseas, I feel like, why then Indonesia, I feel the largest country, but not many written on the book. What's wrong with us? That's why when the ASEAN CG Scorecard then started to happen, and we also, in Indonesia, we every year hold what we call the Annual Report Award. The Annual Report Award basically is also to evaluate all public listed companies and even non-public listed companies to compete on their on their financial settlement and annual report. And of course, by having only two tonight, it will drive us to be more competitive, not only for the regulators, but also for the private sectors, because we have more huge public listed companies that also won the annual report award in Indonesia. And probably because, as mentioned also by a speaker from the BlackRock, that the investor also need to have from the public information, which is the website, for example. We really force the website of the public listed companies in Indonesia is really to be available with full information that we require them. By then, certainly what happened in the ASEAN City Scorecard really push us to change and really push us to behave in the international perspective, because we have to change. We cannot stand with our own principle. I understand it's not easy, but as our colleague from Thailand, of course, we, by issuing like what I explained before, the comply and explain recommendation or rules, we have to give them a grace period, enough grace period to really learn, and then at the end, we're gonna enforce them. By then, within ASEAN, we have the same standard, and for BlackRock, whether they're going to invest in Thailand, Indonesia, or Malaysia, or whatever, or Singapore, they only see from the ASEAN City Scorecard what really happened, what the big companies. It creates competition within Indonesian companies. And I will, of course, provoke, as a deputy director from the ADB said, provoking things. We're going to provoke other public listed companies in Indonesia that next time you must be included among top 50. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sajito. So it looks like competition for the top 50 are heating up for next year. We have about 5 minutes before we open it up for Q&A. So I'd like to ask one more question of the panelists. And this is about good practices in corporate governance. And I'd like to hear your views about some of the practices of public listed companies in your own jurisdiction, or even in ASEAN, that you believe are best practices and could offer insights for the development of international corporate governance principles. So essentially, what are those showcases in your own jurisdictions that you'd like to highlight this morning? Maybe we start with Kun Rapi, because I think Thailand's been working on corporate governance for quite some time.
I think it's the most important thing is really the interest and the buy-in of the private sectors. I think the IOD, which is the Institute of Directors here, has been very, very instrumental. Apart from just training of directors, the whole Regulators forum, whereby independent directors come and attend, and then discuss on various issues relating to corporate governance. And all these sessions are always very well attended. And there's a lot of discussion going on within that forum, which is fairly unusual for the most of the Asian sort of nature, whereby people tend not to speak, whereby people tend to listen more rather than trying to make a heated discussion. But in the IOD's forum, it's been very, very active, whereby people raise various issues and questions. And I think that's a very healthy sign of people taking a real interest and then taking ownership in this issue of corporate governance, rather than just being a compliance base. You don't get the compliance officers coming in at the IOD's forum. It's mainly the top level directors and CEOs, and it's also reflected in what our listed companies association also holds every quarter, as they call it, a CEO forum, whereby we normally get 200 plus people at the CEO levels of listed companies. And a lot of issues that was actually raised in that forums on a regular basis are the development of the corporate governance, not just only where it is going, but also what difficulties and what challenges are there in applying the corporate governance issues into the Thai context. I think that's very healthy, and it's for me, it's a very, very useful sounding board in trying to apply a lot of international standards into the Thai context.
Kunrapi, Paul, would you like to share us your perspectives on some good practices from PLCs?
I would just mention two examples. One example is on sustainability reporting, which was touched on earlier this morning. Something that is gaining a lot of traction. I think our journey started about 4 years ago. Our exchange issued guidelines on integrated reporting, and since then, in earlier this year, they've started engaging the industry to assess the state of practice amongst the issuers in Singapore, listed in Singapore, and to see what the next steps, because they are moving towards a comply and explain approach on sustainability reporting. And I think that's a positive move. And amidst this, we have also noticed that some of the bigger listed companies have already started including elements of sustainability reporting in their annual reports. And I see that as a positive practice. And that could also help to, in a way, foster the kind of, or rather provide the kind of peer pressure for the other bigger listed companies to also do likewise, even ahead of these rules coming into place. The second area is on board independence. Our local code requires that at least 1/3, if not half, under certain circumstances, of the board should be independent. While this is the baseline sort of requirement, we noticed that more than half of the listed companies in Singapore actually exceed the baseline in terms of the independence of directors. I think that is a positive. And the other aspect of it is also in terms of the engagement in the international context, because in Singapore, our constituents are not just domestic, but we also have regional and international constituents. So we are mindful of the practices that are emerging and developing. And so we take into account the OECD principles and the other developments across the region. And so these are things that we see are positive areas that we can actually sort of incorporate in some of our local context. And that would extend to sustainability reporting, as well as the more recent points on how the board's oversight of the management, which came out in the OECD principles that were released. I think these are areas that we can also pay close attention to in the local context.
Thank you, Paul. And for Mr. Sajito.
Oh, well, introducing new rules and regulation, which is give the public listed company more effort to comply, actually must be in the situation, unhappy situation. But unfortunately, when we start issuing these new things, regulation on corporate governance, basically when the market is not really good. And the impact is that when we issued new rules, we have to discuss a lot with the public listed companies and also professionals and and private sectors, because otherwise it is not easy to just issue rule without their participation. In Indonesia, when we issue rules and regulation, we have to thoroughly discuss with the private sectors, and then we catch all their objection or their concerns on the rules. But with respect to the practices, which is good on the corporate governance, we have a Corporate Secretary Association and the Public Listed Company Association, and also our colleague from IICD also conduct a lot of discussion in Indonesia, with include public listed companies. And then from the regulator perspective also, we invite them to discuss a lot on the importance of the implementation of the corporate governance. That really, step by step and gradually they realize on the importance of the corporate governance, and they cannot, do practices like in the past because they feel, like our colleague said, because of the asset crisis and all other crises, they feel that they have to change and they have to compete. And realizing on the importance of the corporate governance practices and a result of the discussion or focus group discussion that we have done many times, and it really impact on the behavior of the public listed companies. And we have also a forum, what we call the OJK Mendengar. So, I mean, Indonesian Financial Service Authority listened to their complaint, on the practices on the rules that we have issued, and then they respond, some of them like the independent directors in practice, and then also on the EGM, they have to put, the candidate of the directors on the website and things like that. And with that discussion and the forum of the Indonesian FSA listening, we can also understand their perspective, and we can also send the message to them, our perspective, an international perspective, and also from the international investor perspective, institutional or even domestic investor perspective. So these kind of practices that we have done by many parties, including, of course, certainly regulators, it's really good to then our corporation can comply with the rules and regulation on corporate governance. Thank you.
Sajito, we've finished the panel discussion, and I'd like to open it up to Q&A from the audience. We're running a little late. We have about 10 minutes, and I think that's probably 2 or 3 questions. So those that would like to address the panel with questions, raise your hand and come to the microphone. Introduce yourself and who you would like to address that question to. It can be an individual panelist or to the panel themselves. There's a gentleman there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I enjoyed the discussion. Congratulate the panel members. I have a question maybe for the speaker from Indonesia and so maybe Thailand. How do you address the importance of shareholder activism, especially in the interest of minority shareholders? Do you consider this important? Thank you.
How important is minority shareholder rights and performance? But if we can take another couple questions, and then we could answer them. Okay, so maybe Sajito, you could answer that. Oh no, we have one.
Hello. Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I'm Yoni from the Philippine SEC. Yeah, of course, one of the great concerns under corporate governance is actually the independence of the independent director. Is there a way to actually measure the independence of independent director? And should it be reported or disclosed at least to the shareholders on a annual basis?
Okay, maybe we'll start. That question is on how do you measure independence of a director, and what extent do you disclose that? But maybe start with Sajito on how important is minority shareholder.
Well, I think it's the only country in ASEAN, I'm not saying the only country in the world, that have specific rules on the importance of the minority shareholders. We have rule on the conflict of interest, which is very tight on that. The rule number is Rule 9E1. This is because I'm the regulator. You know, in many international conferences that I have attended, and my friends attended, there's of course there is a regulation on the related party transaction and all those kind of things. But realizing that in Indonesia, as I told you before, most of the public listed companies still controlled by the family. From my perspective, if a company is still owned directly or indirectly by a person that owns more than 50% of ownership, it is very tough to say that there will be what you call the equitable treatment of the shareholders. Because for those shareholders who control more than 50%, just to elect directors, it needs only a simple majority, 50% plus one. Even second question, what we call by the independent directors. So, Indonesian FSA, even before, when we still named as a Indonesian Capital Market Supervisory Agency, we really stressed on the importance of the minority shareholders. So we really protect the minority shareholders. But of course, we don't want to put the situation that minority shareholders giving a tyranny of minority. Because we have also have to give a right, what is the right of the controlling shareholders. So we try to make a balance. So in any transaction between controlling shareholders, directors, we really rule out, and with the strict regulation. And I, as an enforcer, as many times we impose a sanction on the minority shareholders thing. And even we cannot really cover anything, you know, like in the situation like EGM, for example. Minority shareholders still, if the company still owned by directly or indirectly by a person who controls more than 50%, it is really tough for even the regulator to make a situation that, you know, minority shareholders can be treated as, you know, true shareholders. And to separate between, you know, in the context of fiduciary duty, I believe those who are elected by a person who controls directly or indirectly more than 50%, they're not going to be independent. They have to bow to their elector. Certainly, it is not easy. Realizing that situation, in a good effort, for whatever reason, regulator has to protect in certain ways, and to some extent of the minority shareholders. But again, from time to time, it is not easy for us also to really cope with the situation, because they have also have to, if they have a conflict of interest, they have to hold EGM with the independent shareholders. The question is that, who are called by independent shareholders? And do we know if they are independent? It is, in practice, it's not easy. So what we can do, we can give what you call not trap, but you know, alert. If you do this, you have to follow this. You have to do this, and we also rule out also on any transaction of the public listed company if the transactions are material, for example, and material and conflict of interest. They have to follow this. Some of them I got complaint, and some of them said, this is not international practices, but this is a local wisdom. So if we think that we need that, even not rule out by international principle, we can do it. as long as still we can protect the right of the shareholders, all shareholders, but minority shareholders is really not in good position. So by then, we really stress on how to protect the minority shareholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajito. But maybe we can also hear from Singapore and Thailand, maybe, on one or both of those questions, measuring independence of a director and shareholder minority rights. Khun Rapi?
Okay, sure. When we talk about the independence of directors, I think you have to look at the context of our landscape. It's already been mentioned that 70% of most of the companies that are listed on our ASEAN exchange are probably family control. And most of them would probably implement a 1/3 rules of independent directors only. So in effect, if you have 10 directors sitting on the board, only 3 of them would be independent. So the question that you asked, how independent these 3 directors should be, I think I would ask the question on the flip side, is that how much do the 7 family control directors embrace this issue of independent directors? I think a lot of our rules and regulations put a lot of pressures on the performance of independent directors. But when you put it into this context of family-owned companies are still very much controlled by the majority of the people, you can't realistically expect the 3 people to really go up against the other 7 people and change the mindset of the other 7 people. I think that's where I don't get the regulations. If you're trying to put that much pressure on the independent directors without addressing, the majority shareholders, the regulation would effectively fail in its intended outcome. You may have regulations, but it won't achieve the result that you wanted to do. So I think I think the key for us is really to go out and try to convince, to get a buy-in, to persuade, to use moral persuasion, to use enforcement if necessary, to try to get these 7 people to buy in, and then to come back to Pru's issue this morning would be how could they see that it's actually beneficial for them to adopt it as a strategic position of their companies. And that way, you have less issues to worry about independence of the directors.
Thank you. I fully agree. The issue of independence is very qualitative because you look beyond shareholder, whether you are linked to the substantial shareholder, you're linked to certain businesses, certain management positions. And so there could be a myriad of different factors that could come into play. And so it's very hard at the outset to conclusively say that this person is totally independent. Even if you have a situation where the shareholding spread is more diverse, not just a family-owned company. But I think that there's with the comply or explain, you put it to the company to come out and explain if the person considers himself independent, even if there are certain circumstances that are present. And so that's where the disclosure comes in. The qualitative aspects of that disclosure will be tested if you have strong institutional investment, strong institutional stake in the company. And so there's value in having institutional investors invested in publicly listed companies because they are the ones that could potentially instill that kind of market discipline and raising those questions that why is this person considered independent or not? Because the board members are actually put up for reappointment. And so that's where actually there's scope, even if the minority shareholders don't get that much say. And we've seen some of these happen where institutional investors with a slightly bigger stake can actually pose certain questions and add friction to the process. It will be very challenging for the regulators to intervene into how board meetings are conducted and some of these kind of decisions. Is this actually decided in favor or not in favor of minority shareholders? So I think that there's value in having the institutional support, and therefore it also augurs for some form of a stewardship role that such investors can play, even in the Asian companies.
Thank you very much, Paul. We've actually now come to the end of the session. We don't have any more times for questions, but if you do have questions, please feel free to approach the panelists after the session or even this evening. So I'd just like to wrap up very quickly with some takeaways. And I think from this discussion, it's clear that corporate governance is a high public policy priority of the regulators and policymakers. And that's a high priority because it's important for capital market development, it's for attracting investors, but also financial sector stability. I think the second takeaway that I get from the discussion is corporate governance is not always about regulating. It's not about regulating corporate governance. There are minimum standards that need to be regulated and complied with, but a lot of it's about incentivizing corporates to adopt good practice governance. And the market also plays an important role because if they don't meet corporate governance, they may be hurt through destruction in shareholder value. We've also noted they also highlighted some best practices. Two of them was having board independence and also about promoting corporates' buy-in into the agenda. And finally, the scorecard, the corporate governance scorecard is an important tool, but it's one of many tools that have been adopted to help promote corporate governance in Asia. So thank you, dear panelists, for sharing your thoughts with our audience this morning. I'd like to close this session, and please, I'd like to hear your applause for the panelists. Thank you very much.
Now, I think to complete the picture, we would like to hear from the publicly listed companies themselves. So to moderate the panel discussion of the chairman CEOs and the topic of the business case for corporate governance, branding or burden, I'd like to please call the country manager of our knowledge partner, the International Finance Corporation, Ms. Yuan Su. I hope I pronounced that properly, or Jane. So please, Jane, let's give her a round of applause, please.
Thank you. So let me introduce our distinguished panelists. The first is Mr. Mr. Tajuddin Antan, the Chief Executive Officer of Bursa Malaysia Berhad. Thank you. Thanks. Our next panelist is the CEO and Managing Director of First Pacific Company Limited, Chairman of Felix Mining Corporation, Chairman of Philippine Long Distance Telephone Company, Chairman of Manila Electric Company, Chairman of Metro Pacific Investments Corporation, Chairman of Smart Communications Incorporated, Ms. Manuva V. Paninina. Thank you. Also joining us on stage for the discussion is Mr. Adit Laksutai, Corporate Secretary and Senior Executive Vice President, Chief Investor Relations Officer of Kasikorn Bank, PCL, Bangkok, Thailand. Thank you. So it's great pleasure for me to moderate this panel. The last panel, we hear the view from the regulators. So now we hear the view from the corporates. IFC, as a private arm of oil bank group, we have been among the largest investor in the emerging market, and we learn from our experience of portfolio performance the importance of corporate governance. As Peru mentioned, corporate governance indeed an investment for the shareholders' value, and we have a very interesting topic today: is a corporate governance, branding, or burden. So my personal interpretation of this is indeed good corporate governance is a branding to attract good investors, to attract talented employees and also to attract more and better customers. But as life is like that, nothing comes as free. So to invest, we have to put in resources and efforts. So here I would like to get each of the panelists to share their view about good corporate governance, the branding, the burden, or the value versus cost. So let's start with Manny, if I may.
Well, we've always taken the position that the moment any company goes to the public markets to access public funds, it automatically creates a fiduciary responsibility on the part of the board and the management of that company, because you're using other people's money, right? If it's your own money, if it's a private company and private money being used to conduct the affairs and activities of the firm, then that's a totally private concern. But the moment you get into the public realm, then you're subject to certain public rules. No? So, in fact, the provider of the funds effectively sets the rules under which the board and management should conduct its affairs. And if the people get the government they deserve because they elect the leaders of government, effectively the company gets the shareholders they deserve if you go to the public arena. No? Basically, that's the view. I mean, I think the earliest speaker, I think Ms. Bennett, said that in the case of ASEAN particularly, even Asia in general, most of the companies, somebody said, one of the regulators, he said, about 70% of listed companies in ASEAN are likely to be family-owned, or there's a dominant shareholder. So we don't see boards, majority of whom are independent directors. No? So the essence of it actually is, at the end of the day, it will depend on who that principal owner is and how he or she behaves, or the family behaves, if it is able in the first instance to distinguish what his or her their responsibility as owner and the responsibility as managers of the business. No? Increasingly, I think as these family-controlled corporations become older, so it's the second, third generation children who are involved in the business. And you could see the phenomenon here in ASEAN of the second or third generation children hiring professional managers to professionalize the management and, of course, to be able to conduct their affairs in accordance with good governance practices. No? So that, I think that evinces an evolution in thinking of major shareholders being able to distinguish their role as owners and as managers of the business as well.
Thank you very much. So may I go to Tajudin, share your view from Malaysia?
Thank you very much. I'm a little bit in a quandary here because I wear two hats. One, I'm head of the exchange. At the same time, the exchange is listed. Bursa Malaysia is also listed on its exchange. Let me start with the aspect of an exchange. I think what the earlier panel have already spoken about is the benefit of corporate governance. And I think I should not go there because there's no reason why I should preach to the converts in the room. So the challenge for an exchange here is that we have more than 900 constituents, which means to say more than 900 listed companies that need to understand, to appreciate the value of corporate governance. Hence the question that you asked, whether it is a cost, whether it is a brand. I think chances are any one of us, if we win the award tonight, it will be branding, of course. Be good branding, I think. But the reason that came about here is that those who believe in this, those who have gone through the process, or especially in 97, 98, I, for one, was a treasurer of a second largest bank in Malaysia at that point in time, and really, really understood the cost that is affected by the currency crisis. I think to a certain extent, for any domestic bank, the central bank is the lender of last resort. We still can run to them to get a little bit more liquidity. But banks at that time, companies are exposed to US dollars. What do we do about all those things? Spreads were lost, and all that had been built, that factor in the cost was gone. So I think that's the bigger cost to corporate governance if it is not done well. So in the case of Malaysia, I think we started the journey of corporate governance way back after the 97-98 crisis by Malaysian Institute of Corporate Governance. And I think we were the first ASEAN nation to put in the code of corporate governance roughly in year 2000. Going forward, this is what the exchange is trying to do. The easier one is the converts. We have the big banks, the Maybank, we have big companies like Sam Darby, Axiatas. These are already a convert. And Bursa Malaysia, which is the other hat I'm wearing, is what we also want to carry. What we wanted to say here is, these companies should be the icon, the iconic examples of the other companies that are yet to convert, that will find corporate governance as a cost. So that role is basically what we are doing. If I finish that clear point is that Bursa Malaysia have gone through that process. I think obviously we have our chairman, Datuk Ranjit, who is a very proponent of all those things. I think if I may summarize in many discussions I had, maybe 7 out of 10, Datuk, is about, Tajuddin, are you taking care of the governance? I said, my normal answer will be yes, sir. See, but the importance was there. So we have already built the journey from corporate governance to CSR, and recently, as far as today, this year, I think we were moving up the value chain of sustainability. But as a listed company, Bursa Malaysia plays an important role at which we need to influence, need to be exemplary to the rest of the listed companies in all the other companies that is listed in the exchange. Because, to me, there is different stage of development between the exchange, the companies. There are those who actually made it on the second board, who barely make it, and their focus and approach is about finance. And every other regulatory requirements that comes out of this will be cost to them. I think the reality here is that if you were to talk to these accounting bodies, what they say here is that even the finance sector is being outsourced. You know, so this governance is not about looking at the cost itself, but the business modality that goes over a period of time. But the proof point out of this is straightforward. We have seen through a few economic cycles, 2008, and then as recently some of us in ASEAN countries are experiencing some currency and share price volatility. The companies that have withstood and embraced corporate governance seems to hold their value to a certain extent. So in short, if I can summarize this point here is that while the discussion speaks about cost, I think the linkage between the value proposition to the cost is something that needs to be done. What we have done in the exchange here is that we need to bring them to the journey of appreciating this. So what we have done, number one, we have actually first put a yardstick, which means to say a measure of corporate governance, and then how to measure them. And then we built some guidance to get the public listed company to actually work on it. Because otherwise they say this is onerous, this is too much reporting, this is extra cost to me. But we are saying that there is an easier way to do this. So the iconic companies just now will be exemplaries, while the process are very clear in, we have guidance, we have toolkit to actually work on that. And then, last but not least, to reach out to these 900 companies, there's a lot of engagement. There are a lot of advocacy that goes about this. Because to me, the key factor in implementing corporate governance is few things. Obviously, the senior management must be part of the whole thing. I think Tan Sri spoke about minority shareholders. This activism is something that we are trying to encourage in the AGM so that boards are responsible to do that. But the key point is that in Bursa Malaysia, we spend a lot of time on advocacy. We engage board directors, we engage chairmen, we spend time a lot with the chairman of audit committee and all our board directors to actually speak about the progress, the development of corporate governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we'd like to hear from Adi.
Hello. The sofa here is very comfortable. I'm honored to be on a panel with the CEOs. So I think I'm going to reflect my experience working at people at that level, i.e. the board of directors. A lot of intelligent people define corporate governance differently. And they get more complicated. They add a lot more into that to the point that it will take a few minutes to understand what it is. So I'm going to go back to the basics. I heard that two wise men said that corporate governance is defined by something that the corporate governance deals with the ways in which suppliers of finance to corporations assure themselves of receiving a return to their investment. That says a lot. As one of the executors at the bank, my company, I feel that it means that we need to protect capital. It means that we need to make the capital grow. And it says a lot at the board level because if the board understands and recognizes the role as the steward to protect the capital, then that implies that a tone at the top is set. And once the tone at the top is set, that implies that the rest of the organization will move along with that. So to answer your question whether it's a burden or not, I would say that if the whole organization feels that way, that at the top, they feel that they have to take good care of the capital, then perhaps it's not a burden. It's still pain in the neck, but it's not a burden. And the whole organization will move along with that. So I think the first requirement to unlock the full benefits of corporate governance is just the state of mind. So if tone at the top is set, people at the top understands their roles, then it's easy. Am I allowed to give the example now, or are you going to come back later? Oh, right now, okay. So I'll give the example. Let's talk about transparency. If tone at the top is set that it is important, and we need to maintain good relationship with the shareholders and communicate what we feel and what we do, then that implies that if my bank wants to be a good bank, everything at the top will be translated to, we want to be a bank that has sustainable risk-adjusted return. So that implies that on the day-to-day basis, we live on it. It implies that if we want to be a bank that has sustainable risk-adjusted return, we're going to find our best. We're going to try to overarch the risk management policies and ensure that nothing will damage the capital on the day-to-day basis. We will try our best to spread the risk on the earning profile and say that if we are a bank that can pump up the non-interest income faster than loans, there's a good chance we are going to make some money during the bad economy, just like right now at home. So what does it mean? It means that we spread the risk and we aim towards providing or giving return to shareholders sustainably. That is the tone at the top. To me, another requirement is also substance, not form. Corporate governance, as so many people have said, is not about ticking the boxes, because I mean, sometimes a good student will know how to answer the questions. But when it comes to the end of the day, good shareholders, sensible shareholders, can tell the difference. So I believe that other than just trying to tick all those boxes, if we understand the concept and we feel that corporate governance can be used as a means to differentiate ourselves from the rest of the system, then shareholders can also tell that this company has been doing things by letters of regulations, or this company has embodied the spirit of the regulations into their practice. And to me, I believe that the latter will represent the true meaning of corporate governance. Now, burden, branding, whatever, I think is not the chicken and egg thing. It's the cause and effect. If you have the branding as the result of what we believe in, it's okay. But if we reverse that, let's say that we want to have good image, then try our best to tick all the boxes, as many as we can. Something is not right. And shareholders or the owners of capital can tell the difference. So to me, these are the two requirements: to embrace and then to understand the concept of the true corporate governance. Tone at the top and substance, not form.
So I just want to have a follow-up question. Since in our previous panel, independent director was discussed. So I think from a practical point of view, even if the regulator lay out a perfect prescription about what justify as independent director, in the end, it's about the very person you identified and bring into your corporation. So I'd like to ask each of you to share with us, when you try to identify a candidate for independent directors, what kind of qualities you are looking for? And what are you seeing challenges in finding the right person? Thank you. So maybe start.
Maybe you should ask that to my chairman. But I think in the experience of Malaysian capital market, I think I spoke about board training. We had mandatory training for board members and a continuous training program. I think there are a few things that have been instituted about a length of stay on all those things. I think the process of selection in our market is quite robust. There is, I think, obviously the process of interviewing and taking stock of that. But I'm not going to do that. I think everybody is quite aware of that. Let's just update on what we have done. I think one of the few things is that in Malaysia, there is a move to actually increase in diversity on board members. Somehow or other, it is a challenge. Two categories. One, obviously, the family-owned. Generally, they have their family-related members on that. And then on top of that, in the case of Malaysia, there is also a focus of increasing women on board that carry a little bit more diversity in terms of experience and opportunity. So I think the key we're driving at is that there must be obviously capable board members. There must be some board members with experience in the field that you're talking about. And then the diversity of board members that brings into that. I think in our case, even our Prime Minister is on board on this, to trying to give that. I'm not shy to say that somehow or other, my KPI is to achieve 30% women board members in Malaysia.
Very encouraging.
I know. All of a sudden, I become a favorite among the ladies in Malaysia somehow or other, and Dato' Ranjit is part of it. So I think the process here is we're trying to look through all those things. In the case of Bursa Malaysia, we even have got this in our rules to say that if you have been on the board like after 9 years, the question of independence come into play. But this is not a hard and fast rule to say that after your 9 years you're gone. But you, as a board, you have to evaluate the independence of the person, the capability of the person. If the board still choose to believe that that person is still independent, the person can still contribute, by all means, be on the board. But these are the evaluation process that takes place. And I think it's quite robust.
Thank you. So maybe we can go to Eddie.
We have the Human Resource and Remuneration Committee that will try to reach out for capable and then qualified people. But at the end of the day, when you're looking at the performance of independent directors, they need to provide and then they need to say something independently without the fear to be kicked out. So there is nothing quantifiable about it, but it is something that they behave and exhibit their independent thinking. We are lucky that we have good people. We have 17 board members, 10 of whom are the independent directors. Very rare, but we do need to have this kind of structure because we have a chairman and CEO, 2 roles in the same person. With the permission and approval from the Bank of Thailand, we have to do this, but we need to have the lead independent director, and we need to have the independent directors committee that will have a separate meeting and work by themselves, and then issue the recommendations and submit to the big board. Should there be any event at all for voting, they're going to win because they are the majority of the board. So I think that we do our best. The probability of fighting or getting the wrong person is still there. But so far we are lucky that we have had very good people and good team on board, and they are very active. And by the way, they need to have the meetings at least twice at the company. So I think that's their dedication and their devotion to the whole process here.
And I like what you said, the independence director, they should have this guts, say, I don't care if I piss off you and got kicked out. That's really important. So now we go to Manny. You're sitting on many companies, so I would like to hear from you.
Well, I don't know whether our regulator would like to hear what I'm going to say, but I'll say it anyway. Well, there was a question in the panel earlier that how do you determine or define independence from an independent director? Difficult. You might have several rules, criteria, and so forth, but it's like beauty. I think when you see it, you know it's beautiful. When you see a particular person, then you would have a sense whether that person will give his or her independent view to the board. Now, the typical perception of independent directors is they're independent and therefore very activist on the board. Now, there was an instance in the board of one of our companies, a major listed company, let's not say which, where we procured the services of a trophy director, a very reputable CEO of a major public company. And it was hell. It was hell. He was a very antagonistic director on the board, and he just disrupted the proceedings of the board. No? So at the end, when he actually lost his job in that particular public company, and he, of course, lost his directorship with us. So it's a balance between having someone who would be antagonistic and dysfunctional to the smooth workings of the board, but somebody who will be independent from one perspective, no? That he would not countenance or tolerate any misdealings by management, particularly even at the board or even at the board level. I actually don't know whether the structure, the European structure where you have a two-board system, would be useful in certain jurisdictions where you have the supervisory board and the management board. And, you know, it's like a thesis defense in school where, you know, the supervisory board basically does the Q&A to management after management presents its report. But still, under the two-board structure, there is a great deal of dialogue between the chairman of the management board and the chairman of the supervisory board. And our own experience with the Dutch company has been such that when we came in, because we were not Dutch, we were Asians, we were, you know, there was a bit of lack of harmony in the beginning in that particular board. Now, related to independent boards are two major issues, which has been the subject of some debate here in the Philippines, and I'm sure in other jurisdictions. Number one is the tenure of independent directors. I think the view is divided, whether there should be a strict X years that an independent director should serve on the board, or there should be none. The argument for none is that you don't maximize, optimize the wisdom and experience of independent directors. And the contra there is the argument that there is a real prospect of what we call the phenomenon of co-optation, that as you stay longer in the board, you get enmeshed or embedded in the norms and practices of management. No? So the USSCC has taken the view that a tenure is a mechanistic one, and that the board should go through a regular process of self-assessment in terms of their performance, the skills, in fact, the interpersonal dynamics amongst the board members and between the chairman of the board and the CEO of the company. And of course, the number of directorships that an independent director should have outside of the company he's serving. No? And again, there is the mechanistic view and the non-mechanistic view. At the end, and I'm afraid to say this, but I will say this anyway. Has there been empirical evidence to show that, in the first instance, that corporate governance have a significant influence, or is there a significant statistical correlation between corporate governance and the performance of the company, or indeed the degree of independence of your independent directors to the performance of the company? To date, we have not seen any study that supports in a concrete way that view. I think there is some, but not significant enough. So now, I'm not saying that corporate governance should not be part of the fiber of the company. It should be, because you are serving in a community. Businesses serve in a community, right? And so by definition, they acquire a social dimension that should be integrated into the very fabric of their operations. And you know, increasingly there is an awareness and a requirement for companies to report on a fairly broad spectrum of the risks that they're facing, from the board down to the management level, all the way to physical risks like earthquakes and typhoons in the case of the Philippines. So.
I think your questions we will leave to the academic to really looking into it. But I guess just to look at the current situation, the capital market in U.S. is very robust, also because they have a much higher maybe disclosure requirements and also corporate governance standards. So let's see how we will develop to in the future. So now I would like to open the floor to the audience. So you may stand up and tell us who you are and also your questions, and particularly who you'd like to direct the questions to. Thank you.
Prue Bennett from BlackRock. Thank you very much for a wonderful discussion. I agree with your comments on independent directors. We can't identify if a director's independent or not, even if it might be classified in the reporting as being independent. And independent is a state of mind. It's not just ticking a lot of requirements. And the should bring skill set and counsel to the board. One way we can identify when so-called independent directors are not independent is by behaviours of the company and, for example, egregious related party transactions, because the independent directors are not representing the interests of all shareholders in that case. One thing that I have raised with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and I'd like you to consider this, is when companies disclose the results of the election of directors, and this is for block shareholder companies, what we would like to see is the vote for minority shareholders disclosed separately, not a separate vote, but disclosed separately, so we can see if the minority shareholders are supporting these independent directors. And where there's not majority support from minority shareholders for the, in inverted commas, independent directors, I think the company should then go back to the exchange through a public announcement and justify why those directors should stay on the board. Not that they should be voted off the board, but the company should explain to shareholders why they think that person staying on the board is in the interests of all shareholders when you've got a majority of the minority shareholders not providing support.
You were referring to the Hong Kong regulations, right? I think they do that, at least in our case. They do. No, we do. Because the items for approval of shareholders are taken by poll, and the votation doesn't actually happen during the shareholders meeting. But there's a report immediately after the shareholders meeting by a pollster, an independent pollster, where each of the items of taken up in the shareholders meeting are reported as to the number of votes and percentage of the votes for and against. Now, in the case of election of directors, be they independent or non-independent, there is an identification of how many voted for each individual director and how many voted against. Of course, they don't identify who voted against or who voted for, but it is indicated in my case, there are shareholders who voted against me and against the chairman and etc. Each of the directors. So there is that data given soon after, or as soon as practicable after the shareholders meeting is held. Now, that's in our case. I don't know whether other Hong Kong companies do that. Well, the votes for, against, yes. They don't disclose who voted, no. Yeah, you will know how many voted against you in present in that meeting in person by proxy. Yeah.
Thank you, very interesting. So, any more questions?
I was very interested when you mentioned that you were inviting more women on the corporate boards. I'd like to find out what has been your experience. I know it's for diversity, but have you seen any really impactful difference once you've had women on the board?
Did I set myself up today? At this point in time, I think the numbers generally are coming in by quite slowly. The composition that we're looking here covers two spaces, senior management and at the board level. My personal experience, well, maybe you like to hear that my senior management, more than 60% of them are ladies. Quite strong, I may say publicly. There's two of them here. Opinionated, very, but what I'm trying to look at here is that this diversity, this opportunity, we wanted to make sure that when we embark in this program, it's not filling the numbers. We wanted to make sure that you can fill up with the right capable people. See, especially, it is not the big listed companies that we're concerned about, because normally you would have high-profile, experienced ladies coming in on the board. But the constituents I have also covers the slightly smaller companies, family-owned, that generally will have all male-dominated. And if they were to come in, it is important for them to have a strong opinion that the ladies that is coming in their board are not filling the quota. Our current experience here is that the batch that came about are quite relatively experienced. And to my mind, this is a good step forward. And it's important for us to step it up. So that's the engagement, the training, the advocacy program that we are having. We'll start with the across the board, sorry guys, across the board male chairmen who are around, who have certain preference to all those things. This is what we are trying to embark on, and this is what, as an exchange, we are trying to communicate.
First specific, we have 2 female members of the board, one from Singapore and one Hong Kong, and both are very senior members of the business community in Singapore and Hong Kong. Well, in the first instance, they're prettier than the male members. In the second instance, I find them distinctive for 2 things. One is they're more studious than the male members in terms of studying the board papers. And number 2, they ask the tougher questions. So I think they're a huge addition to the proceedings of the board. And at the same time, they're not disruptive. They take a very broad view of things, and really it's something that is valuable to the board. It's our own experience, and it's something that we'd like to promote in all the other boards of our group.
We have 5 members of the female board members. To me, I learned to understand the concept or the philosophy of strong woman. But if you have a really good board enough, after a while, you cannot tell the difference between men or women. You only see very good dynamism of the board in action, and that is that's what counts, actually. So I think I agree that there should be more diversity. They should have more of different ages, different genders. But then again, we are aiming towards the dynamism of the board.
Thank you very much. And the gender is dear to the heart of many of our females sitting here. But one thing, as a female professional, I think for all of the chairmen and senior management who are committed to support gender balance is really to develop the female employees, give them a chance, because they really have to handle between family obligations versus professional advancement. And I like what you said. It's very important for everyone to be clear. When you select a female board of directors or senior managers, it's not just because of gender, because that's the worst. No one wants to be selected purely because of the gender. Thank you. So we are kind of, maybe one last question.
Thank you. My name is Sulaiman. I didn't introduce myself this morning. My name is Sulaiman from the Telecom Malaysia. This morning I heard two incidences. We were talking about the importance of family-based business in our corporate landscape. I heard Manuel said this is now, and so Sarjito this morning we should talk about the importance of family-based companies in our corporate structure. Does this in any way influence our corporate governance landscape in the country? How does it differ with, say, European style, American style, that sort of thing? Thank you.
How the reality, the family businesses predominant in the region actually influence our corporate governance, maybe the standards and setup, and how it compare with European and American market, right?
Can I attempt that? Or maybe we can do it back home. Tan Sri Sulaiman is from Malaysia. But I think in the case of what I see in our public listed company, there is, I spoke about this, about stages of development. There are companies that started off as a family-owned that embraced the value of corporate governance, converted the company and institutionalized the company. And that's the big step. Despite the fact they are being listed, the next step for most, if not many of them, is to institutionalize the process. When they institutionalize the process, they now embrace all the good values and what you need to do on corporate governance, from diversity, from risk management, and beyond the cost aspect. These are the different. But what we need to do is to actually recognize the stages that they are in, because we impose a certain rule. I think we speak about rule, and we talk about the burden of fiduciary duty to some of them. Imposing them is not what we need to do. We must make sure that they understand the difference and the value that need to be done. In short, what I'm trying to say here is, from the case of our perspective, we will hold hands, we will communicate to say this would be the journey that would benefit these family-owned companies. So the translation between, small company, then subsequent they do bank borrowing, subsequently they are successful enough to raise capital and become listed. But the journey to lose control, this is what in their mind. Despite being listed, they said, am I losing control? But the institutionalization process is the journey that we can take. So different space for different companies, but the exchange would like to be part of that journey.
So Manny and Eddie.
Well, family-owned corporations, somebody said earlier, as I said there, I repeated myself, somebody said 70% of listed companies in ASEAN are generally family-controlled, or there's a group which is a dominant shareholder in the corporation. So that's a given. So the lesson should be that you cannot, Western-type regulations, which require majority board independent directors and certain other related provisions that apply to Western economies, where there's a plethora of truly public companies in that sense, cannot apply to ASEAN. You cannot deprive the owners of the business, be they minorities or majorities, to not vote their shares. So by definition, it will be controlled by the family. So that doesn't mean, however, that the rules do not apply if you're a public corporation, because as I said earlier, precisely the nexus between governance and a public company is created when that company accesses the public market. So you have to follow the rules of public markets. So that you have to do. So there are three levels. One is the nature of the owners, the characteristics of the owner. Are they basically fair and honest in their own dealings with themselves, with the public in general, and in the companies they own? Are they able to distinguish the privileges and rights of an owner versus the attributes of good management of the companies, even if the son or grandson manages the company as CEO? Are they able to distinguish that? Do they make the managers co-owners of the business so that their interests are aligned as well? Then, of course, you have the board is the second device, who would adhere to the standards of governance and to the relevant regulations and laws of that particular jurisdiction. The board must adhere to that by definition, because they're responsible not only to the principal owner but to all shareholders. I'm not saying anything new, but you have to have an effective and independent, quote, a board, but not a dysfunctional board, because you don't want the board members to feel that they don't want to come to a board meeting, because it is an agony to be participating in board meetings which have acrimonious discussions. And the third, and I think the key ingredient, is your CEO. Your CEO, because he is the steward of the assets and the funds that are entrusted to the company. He is also your principal actor in trying to relate to the board and in trying to relate to the principal shareholder. If management, led by the CEO, is independent in its own views and in the conduct of the affairs of the corporation, then I think you have a good public company where the workings of a family-controlled corporation relate well and harmoniously with the management of that corporation who are professional. I think that is the perfect formula for that kind of a family ownership. And I think to be fair to most, I think to a number at least, of these family-owned corporations, they're evolving to that state, no? To the stage where you're seeing more and more professionalism and adherence to public disclosures. And I think I would like to think that the epitome of that here in the Philippines at least is PLDT. Our public float is probably the largest in the stock exchange. And by the way, we're not only regulated by Mr. Bosa here and the stock exchange by Mr. Sikat here, but also we're subject to Hong Kong regulations. And you said the mother of all regulatory regimes, the U.S. Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, and the U.S. SEC, which is also, by the way, the setting for the largest corporate failures in human history, right? The U.S. So what does that say? So, for example, the disclosures, the volume of disclosures that PLDT submits to the U.S. SEC and the New York Stock Exchange is about twice as much as what we disclose here in the Philippines. And we're subject to Sarbanes-Oxley on two main things. One is, for example, the audit committee is all independent directors at PLDT, and they do not technically report to the board. They make their own decisions. They even appoint or recommend for appointment the independent auditors of PLDT, subject only to shareholders' ratification. So the chairman of the board does not have a say as to the appointment of the auditors. And Sarbanes, while there's no outright prohibition on the compensation of board members, particularly independent directors, Sarbanes frowns on anything that smacks of profit sharing or a pecuniary arrangement beyond what the board should get in the nature of a per diem. That's all that they get at PLDT, even if it's one of the largest companies in the stock exchange. So is it a burden or a brand? It's both, right? You have no choice. So in a way, as I've said earlier, it's a little the question is a little academic. The moment you enter the public arena, you're a public persona subject to public rules. If you don't want that, then get out and become a private person. Then you're okay. Then you don't have this forum. You don't need to attend this forum.
Thank you. So I think we're running out of the time. So I will let Tajudin to make some final comments on the cost side.
As I started, I got two roles. Number one, as a listed company in our own listed exchange, our role is to be the exemplary model company to all the rest of the constituents. The second part I just want to add here is that Mr. Hans Sikat, the President and CEO of PSE, is here. In the exchange space, all ASEAN exchange CEOs normally meet. And our role is to be the influencer to embrace corporate governance. I think the earlier panel, I think even all the important keynote speakers this morning emphasized the key point, and I think we are not here to convert anybody. But those here are all converts. As a market operator, Mr. Hans, myself, and all the CEOs of exchanges is to use our position as an influencer for all public listed companies. Frankly, we know the journey is not an easy one. Bulk of the issue sits on the area of conformance. People think that this is a fiduciary duty that needs to be done, that created costs. But to me, and to most of the exchange arena, knows that it is a long-term value. It is like our panel saying that it is both cost and branding, but on the long-term basis, it is not only beneficial for the company, but it's also for the capital market. So that's my piece on behalf of my fellow CEOs of stock exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you. you for our panelists. I think I just want to wrap up. So our conclusion is it's not a burden. And if you choose to be a public company, if you choose to be a good, like excellent, outstanding company, then that is a meaningful investment. So thank you for our panelists for this lively discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. And again, may we please have a photo opportunity. Kindly step forward. Lady and gentlemen, please step forward a little bit. Yes, thank you.
I can't say good morning again because it's now past 12, so it's good afternoon. Thank you for staying on and listening to all of the discussions this morning. So we now come to an important aspect of our program, well, insofar as the Philippines is concerned, because this will be the launch of the first ever Philippine Corporate Governance Blueprint. This came about because of the increasing significance as well as the latest developments in corporate governance, particularly in the ASEAN region. And at first, we were thinking of just amending our Code of Corporate Governance because this was or came into existence in 2002 and revised in 2009, or about 6 years ago. But then we were thinking, with all these issues and controversies and all these unsettled things yet about corporate governance, we said that maybe what we need are more or less directives or guidelines, or more or less a blueprint or roadmap that would serve as a guide, especially when we go to the nitty-gritty of determining which one should come out as rules and which one should come out as mere permissive options for Philippine listed companies. So this blueprint articulates the global corporate governance principles that shall be the basis for further strengthening the CG regime in the Philippines. And taking cue from the recently released G20 OECD Principles of Corporate Governance, it will focus on several aspects like shareholders and their rights of ownership, role of institutional investors and financial advisors, duties to other stakeholders, disclosure and transparency, and board roles and responsibilities. So it provides a section for courses of action that regulators can undertake to develop a stronger and more effective enforcement regime. As can be seen from the subtitle of the blueprint, it is building a stronger corporate governance framework. And the SEC intends to lead Philippine companies, not only publicly listed companies, to have corporate governance standards that are comparable not only among us here in the region, but also worldwide. And this blueprint, of course, would not have been possible without the technical assistance from the Asian Development Bank, and I would say it's from the inception to publication. And I take this opportunity to express our deepest gratitude to Mr. Sani Ismail. Also, in drafting this blueprint, a consultative group composed of various stakeholders was formed. Each and every member of the consultative group, particularly our consultant, Dr. Jess Stanislao of the Institute of Corporate Directors, and Mr. Anar Aliyev of the International Finance Corporation, deserves our sincerest appreciation for their invaluable contribution to the fulfillment of this initiative. Due to time constraints, I will not be able to mention each and person who made up the consultative group, but rest assured we tried our best to give due recognition in the acknowledgements portion of the blueprint. Lastly, personally, I'd like to thank my co-commissioners, Commissioner Tonet Ibe, Commissioners Manny Gaite, Commissioner Blas Viterbo, and Commissioner F. Amatong, and also, of course, the members of our Corporate Governance Division. I wish they'd stand up so people would see who are these, who saw this labor of love come into existence. So it did not take us 9 months. It took us much less than 9 months, but it is a labor of love. So it gives me a great pride to see that all the hard work and effort, as well as all the controversies and even the misunderstandings during the discussions, has produced this document that would pave the way for the improvement and strengthening of corporate governance in the Philippines. So with this, without further ado, I proudly present to everyone who I think will be getting your respective copies, the Philippine Corporate Governance Blueprint. And I'm so honored at this point to give the first copy to the
Yes.
Asian Development Bank.
Yes, and in that regard, may we call on Deputy Director General for the Southeast Asia Department of the ADB, Ms. Noriko Ogawa, to accept the first copy, and also Mr. Richard Bolt, Country Director of the Philippines for the Asian Development Bank. Mr. Bolt will witness it. You can stand beside Chair Herbosa, right? And now we have our photo opportunity. All right. So thank you so much again, Chairman Herbosa. So this wraps up the ASEAN Corporate Governance Conference. Thank you so much for your participation. As Chair said, copies of the governance blueprint are available at the foyer area, together with your certificates of attendance, as well as a giveaway. So please collect it on your way out. We hope to see all of you tonight. And we'd like to invite everyone to the second floor of the ADB. Please follow the usherettes. For our guests of honor and speakers, they will have a separate table. Again, you follow the usherettes, please. And last but not least, for those of you taking the vans back to the hotels, these are for the Oakwood, Crown, Holiday Inn, Marco Polo, and EDSA Shangri-La. The vans will be out at 1:45 p.m. All right? So, bon appetit, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, there shall be vans that will take you to your designated hotels. After lunch, please proceed to the ADB Avenue entrance to take the van back to your hotel. For those attending the awards at the Polo Club tonight, the vans shall leave your hotel at 4:45. Kindly go to the registration table outside to let us know if you are taking the van. Thank you.